So what we're going to talk about here, so we've talked about natural selection so far in terms of evolution, that certain individuals with certain variations are more likely to survive, reproduce, and then pass on those variations to the next generation. And over time, generation after generation, that can lead to the species changing. There's a couple other types of selection that we're going to talk about. So artificial selection is something that's kind of interesting. So dogs, we talked a little bit about them earlier. Do dogs exist in the wild?
Well, I mean, wolves do.
Okay, but do dogs?
No. Unless wild dogs.
There's not really, for the most part, a natural wild population of dogs. Where did our dogs come from?
Animal shelters.
Wait, what?
Animal shelters.
Well, what is the origin of what we would call a dog?
A wolf, a coyote.
Okay, are there wild coyotes and wolves?
And
Wolves?
hyenas.
Yeah, there's dog-like creatures that exist in the wild, but they're not the same as what we would call dogs that we have in our houses. And
Well,
we
they're
have as pets.
domesticated.
What? Okay, so Luke says they're domesticated. Aisha?
They would breed, like, we would breed dogs that have, because our, like, kids, like dogs that have maladies.
Okay.
So I have to breed them.
Yeah, and Luke said the word domesticated, and Aisha's starting to like describe that.
He just
Let's imagine wolves, wild wolves.
yes.
What kind of characteristics do you think, going back thousands of years, humans would try to encourage in those wild wolves?
The hunting stuff.
Loyalty.
Maybe loyalty. How about
Like calmness.
okay, probably calmness, like personality, like behavioral traits that are things you would want that animal to be around. So probably not aggressive traits if you're going to be around humans. Maybe things that are helpful, maybe things that make those animals calmer. And yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to watch a couple of videos about that actually. What about, let me give you another example. Beef. Where does beef come from?
Cows.
Are there wild cows?
Well, there's some I think there might be some. Maybe
Not really wild cows.
maybe some.
Are there wild chickens?
Yes, it's wild chickens probably. There could be a chicken out in the wild somewhere.
Okay, that maybe escaped. But how about pigs?
What about
Yes.
boars? What about
What?
boars?
Warthogs, boars.
But are those pigs?
Yes.
Technically, they're in the genus Sus.
So what I'm trying to get at is what we would call livestock.
Yes.
Beef, chickens,
Pork.
pork, pigs, things like that. Actually, humans used a technique called artificial selection, or sometimes called selective breeding, to take ancestors of those types of animals and sort of shape their traits by selecting certain individuals, allowing them to survive, encouraging them to reproduce, raising the young, and repeating that process. Basically, all crops that we would think. So, corn is another example. You can't go anywhere in the wild and find what we would call corn. It doesn't exist. Humans actually took a plant that's an ancestor of corn
Maize.
and over time kind of allowed one plant to breed with another to eventually create what we would call today corn. And all of our livestock, all of our crops, our pets, they all were basically transformed from wild ancestors in the past into what we would think of today as those things.
Like dinosaurs.
And that process is called artificial selection. So it's also called selective breeding. Basically, by choosing which individuals a human is going to allow to reproduce together, you could encourage certain traits. So, for example, say we have our ancestors, they're dogs, but they're large. How would humans then create a breed of dog that's very small?
They would only breed the smaller ones. Like the
So you take a wild population, and you take the smallest from one group, and the smallest from another, allow them to reproduce, and what do you think their offspring would be like?
smaller.
Probably on the small side, right? Just like if your parents are tall, you're more likely to be tall. If your parents are not as tall, you're less likely. So these traits are inherited. And then if you take from those populations, again, the smallest dogs, allow them to breed together, and you repeat that process for generation after generation, eventually you can actually breed really tiny dogs.
We tried that. They
And
become
then their
ugly.
organs don't fit inside of them.
Yeah,
they
they-
die really quick.
So yeah, can be difficulties with that.
Yeah, did you have
But that process is called selective breeding or artificial selection.
remember when dogs were cute? Now they look like freaking monstrosities and they
How do
just
they do the
Because
The
of
ones
this, my
with their tongues
sister,
hanging
who's a
out.
I mean-
vet,
Oh, hold on, guys. Mr. Oza.
trivia time. Because of this, my sister, who is a veterinarian, she says that there is no such thing as a healthy pug because of
they
artificial
can't breathe. Their
selection.
noses are too small.
In fact, there's so there's like other things too, like certain breeds of dogs are vulnerable to like hip dysplasia, where their hips come out of socket. Also
They're
because we have
open
relatively limited numbers of these individuals, diseases related to inbreeding can start to increase.
I mean, this is what happens. This is why you don't love your sister.
That's what my Yorkie died from.
From some
a
sort of
disease.
genetic.
Yeah.
Oh,
Here's an example of this. This is a plant, wild mustard. This is a plant that grows out in the wild. Humans took this wild mustard plant sometime in the past 10,000 years since the advent of agriculture, and by selective breeding, choosing different individuals to allow them to reproduce. Plants, it's really easy because you can actually take pollen from one plant, put it onto the anther of another, and they'll reproduce. And so this wild mustard is the ancestor to broccoli, cauliflower,
nice.
cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts. All of those plants were created by selective breeding of this wild mustard plant. This is teosinte. This is the ancestor of corn.
So
It's this plant that doesn't really look very much at all like corn, but it has these tiny little fruits that probably at some point in the distant past, tens of thousands of years ago, humans realized that this fruit on this ancestor plant is edible. Well, how do you get from that to what we would call corn today? This thing with huge ears of super sweet, delicious corn.
Make the best ones.
Yeah, you breed the best ones. You take this ancestor plant and ones that happen to have larger fruits. You maybe breed those together with others that had larger fruits, and their offspring have slightly larger. And repeat that, and eventually you create corn that's what we would call corn today.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? You can breed plants.
You can breed plants.
Like, you can crossbreed them too. Like,
And here again, dogs are an example of this. Dogs arose from humans selectively breeding wolves. Okay? We'll watch a couple of videos in a few minutes to talk about how that might have happened. And even after that, different types of dogs were bred. Some were bred to be good in the water, right? Some to be good at finding rodents. Some to be good at working. Okay, And then we have bred some dogs that really are just good at being small and cute. We bred some dogs to be hypoallergenic, and all of these factors, they've been created through selective breeding of humans. A
Yeah.
pet wolf?
Yeah, you could have pet
Not
wolves.
really.
No, I see people with pet wolves.
I mean, you can keep them. I mean, they're not generally going to be something you want to keep around.
I mean, I like.
So another type of selection is something called sexual selection. And sexual selection works slightly differently. And sexual selection happens when mating happens, and typically it is females choosing a mate. And this process can encourage what we call sexual dimorphism. This is when, in a species, the males of a species
Turn to a female.
look quite different from the females of the species. Here's an example, one I'm sure you've seen before.
The peacock, the males are pretty.
So what you think of as a peacock you see at the zoo or something is probably looks like this, right? That's just the male peacock. The female version, the peahen, kind of just looks like a brownish large bird. Doesn't have that huge tail that the males have. Isn't a bright blue color. And we see this pattern repeated in lots of situations. Like, do you know what a mallard duck is?
The male duck, I'm pretty
A
sure.
mallard duck has like a green head. It's got a
Yes.
little blue stripe in its wing.
Yeah.
You see them around here all the time in lakes and things. The female mallard, you know what it looks like?
Brown.
It's just like a brown duck. That's the same body shape, but it doesn't have that green head. It doesn't have those flashy colors. These are wood ducks. This is the male. That's the female.
So
They're the same species,
Just one's pretty, one's
male, female. So we often see this. And this happens because females select their mate based on appearance oftentimes. And so males have evolved in the species to be more brightly colored, to advertise, to help attract mates. Well, why have females evolved to be kind of boring and brown?
Well, because I guess they want to find the males.
So they're picking the males, but why aren't the females?
Because they attract to the males. I mean, the colors attract them.
And why don't the females? Why would it not be helpful for females to be brightly colored?
Well, then they couldn't tell each other apart.
They probably still could.
But like, I mean,
Think about
the female might attract the female, which is not bad. But now I'm trying to think here.
they actually often in these species, the females are responsible for incubating eggs. And so would being brownish in color be an advantage? Because what don't you signal to? Predators. That being sort of this drab color allows the females to hide from predators better because they're often responsible for incubating eggs, raising young. So this is an example of sexual selection. It happens in other species, like lions, right? The male lion
Has a mane.
has a mane. Deer, many types of deer. The males have large, showy antlers. The females do not. Even anoles, lizards, some have this dewlap, this bright orange
Lizard.
dewlap that helps with attracting females as well. These are guppies, beetles. Happens in lots of species. All right, a couple more slides. We've seen these diagrams already. These kind of diagrams help us understand the evolutionary history of species. They show sort of, it's like almost like a family tree of evolution. Can anyone look at this and try to think about what does this diagram
Genus.
tell us? It's telling me something.
That we all derive from a common ancestor.
Okay, well, So Luke is one thing that humans and fungi and plants did have a common ancestor at some point in the past. It was a very long time ago.
Yes.
What else does this tell us?
We're related to fungi.
Okay, we are related to fungi because we do have a common ancestor sometime in the past.
Yes.
What about, tell me, what does this say about a fungus and a plant?
Well, they're not the same, but they're like technically like related in some way.
What is a fungus more closely related to? A plant
Well, not
or a human?
It looks like a human.
Yeah, that's what this is telling us. It's telling us that a plant and the fungus are more distantly related than a human and a fungus.
So technically,
What we would say is that a human and a fungus had a common ancestor more recently than the fungus and the plant. We call these kind of diagrams a cladogram. They show us the history of a species. It's called the study of phylogeny. And often we'll use DNA evidence to help us understand that. So let me ask you some questions about these animals. Is a wolf more closely related to a skunk or a leopard? Why don't you raise your hand for this one? Is a wolf more closely related to a skunk or a leopard? Logan,
I would say a leopard
why do you say that? Give me your reason.
because a skunk they're small and when they get scared and try to protect themselves they spray
Okay.
people.
So you're kind of using what you know about these animals. Aisha, what were you going to say? Were you going to say the same answer?
I was gonna say it's
It's more closely related to a skunk? How come? Why were you going to say that?
just because it's closer to like
why you
it's
stole my answer?
closer in the chart. They're near to the
Okay. I'm looking for you're getting very close. Ray, what are you going to say?
I was gonna say a leopard because if you look at the lines, there's not like it's not as squiggly, you know, like
Oh, okay. It's not as squiggly.
yeah.
They like at the end they when they have that thing they connect.
Mr. Duras, I'm
Yeah.
dying over here. Please.
You're dying?
Please.
They don't connect.
Fr-
Oh, I get it.
Francesca?
I already noticed the difference before that.
It's a skunk because they have a more recent common ancestor.
Now that's how we want to phrase this. So explain what that means, Francesca.
The little line.
The lines here.
The where they connect is closer than where skunk and wolf connect is closer than where the panther and the wolf connect.
Oh,
I
shoot.
was gonna say it. I was gonna say
Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Yes. Okay. Can I do this? Okay. So yeah, if we look, what we way we want to phrase this is through talking about common ancestors. So if we look at the wolf, okay, just here, and we look at the skunk, and we look at the leopard, we want to look how far back do we have to go to find the common ancestor. So where's the common ancestor of the wolf and the skunk?
Two.
the canis.
So we got to find where they connect. It's right here.
So that's your combination.
That's their common ancestor. How about the leopard? So do the leopard and the wolf share a common ancestor somewhere?
Yeah, well, yeah, right near carnivore. Right?
Yeah, right here. But you have to go back farther in order to find that. So they're not as close related.
They're more cat related.
Who's most close related to, again, raise your hand, please. Which is most closely related to an otter? A European otter.
The skunk.
Who could tell me and explain why?
Goes back to the
Andrew?
Goes back to the family. Got one.
Okay, so which one is most closely related to an otter?
I'd like the others to answer this one.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
The others.
So the otter,
I agree with you on that first one. I was saying when I was thinking about how you have to go back farther.
right.
This one, I
Where do I have to go to find the common ancestor, Andrew?
the skunk, obviously.
Skunk and otter. Right. Where's their common ancestor?
Common ancestor. Give me an otter.
Yep, otter and skunk, their ancestor,
Yeah.
right here. I don't have to go back.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't have to go back too far.
I was about to say it.
Okay. To find their common ancestor.
Farm thing.
One last question. Of all five of these species, which two are most closely related? And why? Which two are most closely related and why?
Maybe messing up.
Hold on. I want to wait for hands. Give everyone a chance to think for a second. Jordan? Why?
Sure. Or ancestor.
Okay, you have to go back. You don't have to go back very far to find their common ancestor. It's right here. So when we're talking about relatedness, we are talking about common ancestors.
Okay, I figured out like a good way to explain it.
Yes.
Can I do that?
Go for it.
Okay, so everybody's looking at the squigglies, and you're supposed to be looking at how far up and down it is. The farther down it is, the more far away it is. So you want to look, if it's asking you the closest, you want to look up the farthest, where they connect.
Yeah.
Up the farthest.
And sometimes we even have this labeled as this is like modern day.
So wouldn't it be that a leopard is closest to wolf?
No.
So if you look at what you want to do is trace them both back and see where they actually connect. And the farther you have to go back, the less closely related. So when we go wolf and leopard, we have to go all the way back to here to find it. And that's a long time ago. Long ago.
So you can see the little dot where the leopard and the wolf connect is farther down than the dot where the skunk and the wolf connect. And you want to read it from the top is more
Today.
recent.
Yeah, this is today. This is long ago. We'll look at more examples as well. So finally, the last thing to talk about. Let's talk about, that's not what I want to do. Life on Earth. So when we think about life, how old's the Earth?
365 billion years.
More than that.
4.6 something billion.
4.6 billion years.
What's the number, Andrew? Yes, it's 4.6 billion years old. That's how old the Earth is. And for a long time, for a billion years, the first billion years of the Earth's history, there was nothing alive on the Earth.
It's just fire
The first life on Earth
or bacteria.
that scientists can have evidence of is 3.5 billion years ago. And the life that was on the Earth at first was just very simple
Bacteria.
basically. Over time, those bacteria evolved, and through this process we've been talking about, evolution led to the diversity of life that we have on Earth. Basically, you have single-celled organisms to begin. They became more complex over time. They started to form multicellular life. Okay? They started to form things like invertebrate animals, worms, things like that, sponges,
Jellyfish.
eventually jellyfish. Things start to develop more complex nervous systems. Eventually, life moved on to land. Vertebrates arose, and then amphibians, reptiles. Where did birds evolve from?
Well, dinosaurs.
Yeah, birds evolved from reptiles.
Yeah.
Do you know what else evolved from reptiles?
Lizards.
Well, there are reptiles.
Let me think.
Mammals.
Mammals.
As well.
The headphones.
Here we have sort of the overview of that evolution of life Any questions about our notes? We'll stop there.